fits your request. The cabin in the woods. It started with an invitation. A simple message on my phone. Hey, you should come with us this weekend. We rented a cabin in the woods. Need to get away from everything. I was never much for nature, always more of a city person, but the thought of getting out of town and having some peace for a couple of days seemed nice. So, I agreed. When I pulled up to the cabin, I wasn't impressed. It looked like something out of an old, forgotten movie, wooden, weathered, with a sagging porch and a single light flickering in the distance. The kind of place where the silence almost smothers you. My friends, Rachel and Ben, had already arrived. They were unloading the car, laughing, seemingly excited about the weekend. Glad you could make it, Rachel said, smiling at me as I stepped out of my car. Ben waved but didn't say much. I didn't realize it'd be this remote, I commented, squinting at the cabin. It was isolated, no neighbors in sight. Just trees, dense and thick, stretching in all directions. Yeah, that's the point, Ben said, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. No distractions. Just us in the woods. I wasn't so sure about that. I had always been uneasy about places that felt too secluded. Maybe it was because I'd grown up in a city, surrounded by people and noise. Out here, it was just too quiet. Almost unnatural. Once inside, the cabin felt older than it looked from the outside. The wooden floors creaked under my feet, and the smell of mildew and damp would fill the air. There was a fireplace at one end of the room, a few mismatched chairs, and a worn-out couch in front of it. The kitchen area was small, with just enough room for a stove, a fridge, and a couple of cabinets. The only bathroom was tiny, tucked away in a corner, with a shower that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. The whole place had this heavy, oppressive feel to it, like the walls were closing in. Ben and Rachel seemed to love it, though. They set their bags down and immediately started unpacking. I found a spot on the couch and sat down, looking around, trying to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. By the time the sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the cabin, Rachel suggested we go for a walk. We should explore, she said. You can't come all the way out here and not check out the surroundings. I hesitated but decided to go along with it. After all, I wasn't going to sit around in that cabin all night. The woods were dense, with thick trees that blocked out most of the light. The air was cool and damp, and as we walked deeper into the forest, the sounds of the world outside seemed to fade away. There was only the crunch of leaves under our feet and the occasional rustle of branches. The further we went, the more oppressive the silence became. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt suffocating. Do you hear that? Ben suddenly asked, stopping in his tracks. He turned his head toward the trees, his expression tensed. I listened, but I didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. Just the wind and the occasional bird calling in the distance. Hear what? I asked, trying to calm my racing heart. Nothing. Maybe I imagined it, Ben muttered, shaking his head. But there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. We kept walking, but the weird feeling stuck with me. The woods seemed darker, more unsettling with each passing step. It felt like something was out there, watching us. But when I glanced around, all I could see were the same trees, the same twisted branches reaching toward the sky. After about an hour, we turned back, and the light was nearly gone. The cabin was barely visible through the trees, just a faint outline in the distance. We hurried back, eager to get inside, but something wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the forest felt wrong now. It was like it had shifted, changed, and I wasn't sure I wanted to be there anymore. Back in the cabin, Rachel suggested we light a fire in the fireplace. It was already chilly, and the warmth would feel nice. Ben and I helped gather some firewood, and soon the flames crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The three of us settled into the living room, but there was this uneasy tension in the air, like we were all waiting for something. That night, after we went to bed, I couldn't sleep. The silence in the cabin was so deep, it pressed in on me. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind outside seemed to amplify. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. Around 2 a.m., I heard it. A faint sound. It was a thumping noise, like something was tapping on the walls. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. My first thought was that it was just the house settling. Old houses make noises. But the sound continued, rhythmic and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I glanced at the door to the hallway. Ben's door was slightly ajar, but Rachel's was shut tight. I wasn't sure what to do, so I stayed still, straining to hear. The tapping grew louder, closer. I could almost feel it moving along the wall toward my room. I got out of bed, my legs shaky, and crept toward the door. I opened it just enough to peek into the hallway. The dim light from the living room cast long shadows across the floor. But there was nothing. No sign of movement. I thought about waking Ben, but something in my gut told me that wasn't a good idea. I wasn't sure why, but I had a feeling we were being watched. I closed my door slowly and locked it, then climbed back into bed, trying to ignore the growing feeling of dread. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found Ben and Rachel in the kitchen, acting normal. Ben was making coffee. Rachel was looking through the cupboards for something to eat. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened in the night. Something I couldn't explain. Did you guys hear anything last night? I asked, trying to sound casual. Rachel shook her head. No. Why? I hesitated. I don't know. I thought I heard something, like tapping on the walls. Ben looked up from his coffee. It was probably just the house settling. It's an old place, you know? I nodded, trying to convince myself that's all it was. But as the day wore on, the feeling didn't leave. The cabin seemed to get colder, despite the fire burning in the fireplace. It felt like something was waiting. That afternoon, we decided to take another walk in the woods. This time, I felt like I needed to know what was out there. Maybe it would make me feel better. Give me some answers. We walked deeper into the forest than we had the day before, farther than I had ever planned to go. The trees seemed to close in around us, the branches blocking out the sun. The air was thick with moisture, and the ground beneath our feet was soft, like the earth was swallowing us whole. After a while, I realized we were lost. The path we had been following had disappeared, and we were surrounded by nothing but trees. The silence was so complete that it almost hurt. My skin prickled, and I felt like we were being tracked, like something was following us through the woods. Where are we? Rachel asked, her voice tight with fear. I don't know, Ben said, his voice uncertain. I looked around, trying to find something familiar. But everything looked the same. The trees were all twisted and gnarled, the ground uneven and slippery. My heart raced. Just then, I heard it. A noise. It was soft at first, but then it grew louder. Footsteps. Someone was walking behind us, matching our pace. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just trees. The footsteps stopped. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I turned back to Ben and Rachel. We need to get out of here. Now. We started walking faster, but the footsteps started again. And this time, they were closer. I could hear the crunching of leaves, the rustling of branches. Something was following us. We ran. I don't know how long we ran, but it felt like hours. The trees seemed to stretch on forever. Then, suddenly, the woods opened up. There, just ahead of us, was the cabin. We stumbled inside, breathless and panicked. I locked the door behind us, my hand shaking. What the hell was that? Rachel gasped. I don't know, I said, my voice barely a whisper. But we're not alone out there. We spent the rest of the day inside, not daring to go back into the woods. That night, the tapping returned. But this time, it was louder. More insistent. I don't know how long we stayed in that cabin. Days? Maybe weeks. We never went back into the woods, and eventually, we left. But when I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. I still hear the tapping at night sometimes. And when I close my eyes, I swear I can still feel the eyes of something watching me from the woods. Let me know if you'd like to expand further or explore more aspects